With the introduction of both Ruan and Dr. Ratio in the recent events, we actually got a glimpse at how two of the largest erudition-based factions actually function. I'm talking of course about the Genius Society and the Intelligencia Guild. While it might not be immediately apparent, how Ruan and Ratio interacted and handled the situation was very representative of how each of the organizations they belong to functioned as well. So in this video, we are going to discuss both of these erudition-based factions and talk about the duality that exists between these two distinct group of geniuses. Before we dive into that, if you want to see more Honkai Star Rail content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Most factions in Honkai Star Rail that follow the paths and the eons are often made up of two groups. Each of those groups tend to have differing opinions on how to best follow their respective gods. The Anti-Meta Legion, for example, are more organized and have a more orderly approach to destruction, while the Annihilation Gang are more chaotic, despite both following Nanook and destruction. This is the same for the followers of Erudition and Nous. While they each pursue the higher echelons of knowledge, their end goal couldn't be more different. It's fairly evident when you see how both Ruan and Dr. Ratio carry themselves and what they do with the discoveries their research unearths. Let's talk about the Intelligencia Guild first, as I'm sure most of you already know about the Genius Society by this point. The Intelligencia Guild, while being a faction all its own, is heavily connected to the Inter-Astral Peace Corporation, or the IPC. This relationship exists mostly due to the IPC heavily sponsoring the Intelligencia Guild, likely in exchange for any practical discoveries the guild makes. The driving principle behind the Intelligencia Guild is that all knowledge must be circulated as freely as currency. To them, any scientific discovery that can better humanity as a whole should be distributed and taught to every person capable of learning it. You can see this sentiment or way of thinking reflected in Dr. Ratio, who, despite his initially suspect actions, does indeed want to elevate and help the general public when it comes to increasing their understanding of the world around them. They view themselves as working towards the betterment of humanity as a whole and has actually changed the landscape of the universe significantly. One good example of this is through the discovery and development of the synesthesia beacon. The beacon is functionally a universal translation tool that allows people of different planets and systems to communicate with one another, removing any language barriers. While they did develop this with the help of one of the Genius Society members, they didn't hoard the knowledge for themselves, something the Genius Society often do, and ensured everyone benefited from it. There could be an argument here that breaking down language barriers does help the IPC conduct business far more easily, but as far as the guild is concerned, they view it as helping the average Joe. The way the guild thinks is also a bit similar to how a business would run, likely due to their association with the IPC. Knowledge is like currency, and while it should be spread as far and as wide as possible, it should also be thought of as a way to gain more knowledge. The guild believes that a true scientific community shouldn't exist in isolation, and any information should be exchanged for others so that both parties may benefit. Now, despite the positive they have brought to the universe and their well-meaning approach to science, in terms of sheer knowledge and discoveries, they severely lag behind the Genius Society. There have been a handful of members, such as Elias Celas and Herta, who do help out the Intelligencia Guild, but the majority of the Genius Society do not, and actually view the guild as beneath them. This is where the duality and contrast of these two groups become evident. While the guild wishes to spread knowledge and in doing so help humanity at large, the Genius Society isn't so keen on doing that. Most of the members of the Genius Society often expand the boundaries of scientific discovery for their own personal gain or reasons. Members like Herta, for example, do share some of their discoveries with others, but not all of them, and there are things she has kept for herself. Other members, on the other hand, outright ignore the general populace despite having technology that would advance scientific understanding immensely if shared. Stephen Lloyd, for example, managed to create a set of tools that could manipulate light itself, which was a tremendous leap forward, but chose to not share it with others and used it only for his own purposes. It's even said that if a fraction of what the society knew were to be released, humanity as a whole would advance several hundred years into the future. This is largely the difference between these two factions. The Intelligencia Guild looks to share and develop humanity as a whole through science, despite not being as academically gifted, while the Genius Society, despite being centuries ahead, only looks to enrich themselves. This is why both Dr. Ratio and Ruan make great comparative examples of their respective factions. Dr. Ratio, while appearing rather pompous and self-absorbed, is actively trying to help humanity as a whole, while Ruan clearly only pursues knowledge for her own sake and nobody else's. While you might make the assumption here that this makes the Genius Society a worse off looking group given their unwillingness to share, it's important to remember that the Guild is an organization purposely made for the dissemination of knowledge, while the Society is not. The Genius Society is a loose cabal of geniuses handpicked by the eon of erudition who in truth have no real connection to one another. In fact, there have been many individual controversies that plague the Genius Society, such as member number 27, Rubert, who kicked off the Mechanical Wars, or member number 4, Polka Kakamon, who has systematically been killing Genius Society members. The only example we see of the society members collaborating is those on the Simulated Universe project. What I'm trying to say here is that we can't really view the Genius Society as an inherently evil or selfish group, given it isn't an organization built for the express purpose of collaboration, but rather for Nous to group the brightest minds of the universe into one common faction. Why it's doing this is anyone's guess. So when we compare how Ruan Mei, Herta, and Dr. Ratio reacted to the events happening in the space station, it's very evident which faction they actually belong to long before their affiliations are revealed. One appears rather full of himself but still acts in a selfless way, while the others think only of their own research and gain. I suppose geniuses do need some level of self-centeredness to be able to question existence itself, and neither group is inherently bad here, just different ways of functioning. I found it interesting that each faction often have such different approaches and interpretations to the paths despite them following fundamentally the same thing, and I suppose this isn't any different for those who follow erudition. Again, this doesn't mean one is better than the other. Despite the Intelligencia Guild's penchant for distributing knowledge, they are also known to monetize some of their technology and limiting access to it, while members of the Genius Society, who might appear more selfish, but actually occasionally release technology to the wider universe without any restrictions. So neither can be considered to be truly good or bad. Right now, we have only met Dr. Ratio, but I'm hoping in the future we learn more about the Intelligencia Guild and its members and see if their reputation remains consistent. So, if you had to choose, which group would you likely gravitate more towards? Would it be the Intelligencia Guild or the Genius Society? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed watching the video, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.